having some second thoughts about Jigsaw, and although I still think it's a terrible film, I think the ferocity of my original response probably doesn't match the quality of the film in reality. Like, as a horror murder mystery kind of thing, it's an okay film. It's just, as a film under the name of the Saw franchise, it's terrible. And I think there's a few reasons for this, and I'm going to kind of try and spill them out. I think the biggest problem with Jigsaw is it just isn't a Saw film. And when I say a Saw film, I mean the original Saw, as in Saw 1, Saw 2, maybe even Saw 3. They're all very good films, and I think the problem is that when you start with a film like Saw, which is kind of, there's a set of rules, but the game can kind of play out in so many different ways, and obviously the way it plays out is the way it plays out. But you know, Adam could have sawn his foot off and escaped, or the Doctor might well have killed him earlier, or there's a few different ways that the game would have played out, and if they'd played out that way, it would have all been cool. And what happens in the later Saw films is you just get this kind of person who has to go through almost like a video game style trap to trap to trap, and whether they have to suffer the traps or the other people do, it just feels like there's no real point. They're just going from level to level with increasingly excruciating death being memed out to other people. But there's a few other things that aren't great about this film. I mean, the first thing is there's absolutely no continuity to the other Saw films. Like, there's absolutely no point in knowing anything about Saw as a series before you go into this film. In fact, to be honest, if you know nothing about it, you'll probably enjoy it more. Because you'll just be annoyed. You'll end up going, where's Hoffman? Where's Dr. Lawrence Gordon? Where's so and so? You're just going to be annoyed. And it doesn't work as a brilliant prequel either, to be perfectly honest. Other things, obviously, it's just little things like the lighting. The lighting in the Saw films originally was so good because it was dark and dingy, and you have these like flashback scenes which are kind of almost set in kind of this whitewashed colour and happen in slow motion, and the kind of style, the cinematic style of Saw, I think did help to make it incredibly creepy. Like, even things like when someone's about to die, like the amount of frantic cuts and flashbacks that happen, and then suddenly it goes game over and someone's head gets smashed into pieces, and you just put completely on edge. And this film, it's just in the way it's shot in a slow way, with kind of the lighting just looks like a student film. It's not heaped with flashbacks. It's not really heaped with any kind of ingenuity in the way it's shot. It's just kind of that they just put the camera there and say, what's the most obvious position to take this shot? Great, do it there. And I don't think they really tried in the way that I think the original Saw tried to really put you on edge. And I think that laziness has been going throughout the series, but I think it became more obvious in this film. The second problem is that it's just totally unoriginal as a film. So, for instance, it uses a lot of the original tropes in Saw films. So you have the clown. Obviously, you have like little lectures from Jigsaw, which, to be perfectly honest, are scripted so poorly in comparison to the original films. Like, the cryptic clues aren't cryptic at all. Like the sacrifice of blood thing at the start. Like, it's so obvious what he's talking about. It's unreal, and there's no, it feels very apocalyptic and cryptic and preachy, and ultimately it isn't in comparison to what it was. It feels like it's been written by a 5-year-old when previously it doesn't feel like it's been written by a 5-year-old. It feels like it's been written by a Saw films fanboy who just doesn't have anything on James Wan and Lee Whannell, to be honest. It also steals a lot of things, like there's a time loop. It steals some of the kind of the trap ideas from before. Obviously, again, it has a twist at the end where the character that you think is going to be Jigsaw is actually not. And the guy that no one suspects throughout the film turns out to be the guy. And to be honest, Logan was, in my opinion, an incredibly obvious Saw villain the whole way through. Like, The scars on his back show that he's been through something before. You don't find an awful lot out about him. Everyone close to him suspects everyone else except for him. He's throwing around the accusations. To be honest, it just, he's a pathology expert. He's just got it written all over him, in my opinion, that like he was going to be the killer. And I just don't think the film does anything to throw you off course the whole way through. And lo and behold, yet again, Jigsaw has this other protege who survives one of his traps and turns out to be his new helper and is discovering how to do incredible traps. And it's just boring. Guys in the Jigsaw team, it is boring. Lionsgate, it is boring. We had Amanda, and we could stomach Amanda because she's different to Jigsaw, because Jigsaw's meticulous and moral in so many ways, and yet Amanda isn't. She's just angry at the world. And then you can take that, and then you can kind of take Hoffman, because Hoffman is a hothead who kind of becomes a corrupt cop and you can kind of take it because him and Amanda working together. Obviously, Hoffman got more of what Jigsaw meant than Amanda, which is why he takes it on and she doesn't. But then when Lawrence Gordon is there, you're just like, this is getting ridiculous now. How many more proteges do you have? And then you get this guy, and I look at all four of them, and I just go, how did none of you ever bump into each other, or know anything about each other, or not appear in any of the other Saw films? And honestly, it's just silly now. Stop it, please stop it. And the final issue I have is actually just with the mechanics of the game itself in Jigsaw. And for a start, so we have the blood game, where they wake up with buckets on their heads and then get driven towards these circular saws. But obviously you can't lose that game, because as soon as apparently you shed any blood at all, the door opens. So no one should have lost that particular game. They all should have made it through the doors. But under the assumption that you can't make it through the doors, how does Jigsaw know which ones are going to survive? How does he know which ones are going to work it out, have the wherewithal to cut themselves, or have the balls to cut themselves and not die? I just don't get it. I don't get how he can know that. But he obviously does know it, because there's no tape for Logan in the original game. But there are tapes for all the other contestants. And Hannah is an incredibly important part of the final set play. So I look at that and go, how did Jigsaw know that? Is he omniscient? It's just frustrating. And also, why does he rescue the dude from his trap, like in the twist at the end? Because he never does that to anyone. He lets the game play out. There's plenty of people who haven't done anything that bad, like Adam, who just takes pictures of people. And Jigsaw lets the game play out. Like, he is a sick man at the same time as having some kind of rhyme and reason and morality behind what he does. He wouldn't just go, oh man, I've made a mistake here, and rescue a guy. It's ridiculous. Obviously, once we get to the second stage of the game with the hanging and the needles, and she has to inject the needles, like, the girl works it out straight away. Oh, it's $3.53 because $3.53. Why doesn't she just inject herself? She's got nothing to lose. She knows that one of them is going to kill her, and if not, they're all going to die anyway. Why don't she just go for it? I would have done. Well, maybe I wouldn't have done, but at the same time, I just, it's just obvious. And at the end of the day, there's so many things that could go wrong there. What if they drop the needles while they're hanging? What if Brian injects her with doesn't inject her? What if he injects the wrong person? What if he didn't pick the needles up early enough? Because the thing comes swinging up when they start getting hung. Like, there's so many things that can go wrong. And how can they tell who's going to survive and who isn't? What if they drop them all and one of them breaks their leg on the fall and then doesn't make it into the next room? And then obviously you get to the third room and the no exit door. And once again, so Brian's the dude who walks through and, ends up getting his foot stuck in this device. But how does Jigsaw know that Brian is going to be that stupid? It could have been any of them. It could have been none of them. They could have just sat there in the locked room for all of time. How does he understand? How does he know? Like, unless he's literally following them around, there's just no way that he's got that sort of capability of knowledge. But he obviously does, because he tells Mitch and Anna, oh, well, you guys are going to get buried alive unless Brian rescues you. And then you have Mitch, who could easily have died. Firstly, he could have been hung by now, or he could have been cut by the circular saws. But also, you know, when he's getting buried alive and all these trowels and shovels and circular saws are dropping from the ceiling, what if one of them hits him or Anna? What if it hits one of the two of them? Then the whole thing is ruined at that point. But luckily it doesn't, and Brian manages to save them. But again, I don't really know how Jigsaw understands that, but he obviously has guessed that that will be exactly how it turns out because he has a game waiting for Mitch in the next room. And then, obviously, you get to the final set play, and obviously Hannah shoots herself in the face and therefore destroys the key. And it's kind of like a bit of a... It reminded me a lot of when Jigsaw goes, "Your son is in a safe place" in Saw 2. But I guess I just feel sorry for Brian because essentially there's no way of him winning the game. Like, he gets it, he understands that he's not supposed to touch the gun or shoot anyone, and he still dies as a result. I just kind of look at it and go, "Come on, Jigsaw, you're better than that. There's always a way out for any of the players. In your games, in Hoffman's games, yeah, sure, great. But Hoffman's not you, and it's well established that Hoffman was a bit of a hothead. In Amanda's games, the games are rigged so that the victims die. But that was Amanda, and Jigsaw, you're better than that." But he doesn't really make himself better than that. That being said, the 10-minute segment that Tobin Bell is in as Jigsaw and the game that he sets up there is probably the best part of the film. But it's still not great. And at the end of the day, you also just don't have any character tension. Like, if you look at the original Saw films, you've got the first Saw film where you've got these two strangers who end up actually knowing each other. Well, as in Adam knows the Doctor and the Doctor knows Jigsaw, and it's so interlinked and it's so smart, and the guy they think is Jigsaw is actually an intern at the hospital, and it's just so smartly done. And then you have Saw 2, where obviously all the characters are victims of Donnie Wahlberg's wrong convictions, and all of them except obviously for the son. And obviously the son is the one who has to survive the game, and Amanda has to save him, and we realise that, and therefore there's tension created throughout all of these characters as a result of that fact. And then Saw 3, you have the fact that the two people playing the game, so the Doctor who's trying to keep Saw alive and the guy who's getting through all the traps are actually married. So again, there's real character tension and interlinking that we don't realise, that when it becomes apparent you go, "Oh my goodness," and there's just none of that at all. Like, yeah, one of them inadvertently murders Jigsaw's nephew, and one of them was his next door neighbour, but there's no, "Oh, we know each other. Oh, there's this thing. Oh, there's this oh, that's who that person is. That's why they're suffering this." There's none of that at all. And to be quite frank, it just doesn't stack up in the same clever way. To be honest, I think the issue with this is that Jigsaw, well, the Saw franchise as a whole, is such a commercial monster piece now. Like, as in, everyone knows that people are going to go and see the films and they're going to make money, that people are crawling all over it to try and, like, commission themselves a Saw movie. But they just don't have that same fire that the original guys had. Like, the original Saw film is one of the best horror works of genius, in my opinion, in the 21st century. And very little rivals it. And its sequel is still very good. And Saw 3 is still, pretty clever, even though it's pretty horrific. And then obviously what happens is people start fanboying and going, "Oh, but what if we created this trap? And what if we created this trap?" And essentially it feels like Saw 4 through to Saw 8 is just fan fiction. It's just fan fiction. It kind of, the trilogy was nicely wrapped up, and then they carried it on just for the sake of creating more gory traps and more gory, amazing set pieces to keep the fans disgusted and amused. And it's led us into this horrible position now where you just have this mainstream twaddle that really doesn't have a great plot, doesn't really have anything original going for it at all, and just ends up making nonsense because it hasn't been thought through. It hasn't got a twist that, although the twist does make sense and is kind of clever, hasn't actually wowed you at all. And that, right, just because at the very end you split some dude's head open and everyone baying for blood gets a bit, you think that you've pleased the fans, but ultimately this film hasn't pleased the fans. And I quite frankly hope it fails. And if we ever see the name Jigsaw again, it's going to come under the balls and the guile of the original guys who made it, because literally no one else is ever going to make this franchise worth watching. So those are my thoughts, and obviously let me know if you agree or not, or if you've noticed anything else that annoyed you or pleased you about the film. And see you later.